Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem, and today we'll talk about false relations in the late Renaissance. If you like Renaissance music, you might have heard the term false relation or cross relation. This contrapuntal phenomenon, which is known for its crunchy dissonances, is often associated with English Renaissance music. In this episode, we will examine it in detail and see whether it is especially English. Let's start. Nowadays, the English term false relation or cross relation refers mostly to a situation in which a note in one voice is the same as a note in another voice, regardless of its octave, except that it has been altered by an accidental. The two notes can appear either simultaneously, which renders the harshest effect, like so, or one after the other, non-simultaneously, which is still disturbing but less so, like so. This phenomenon is the focus of this episode. However, the term false relation and its parallels in other languages, like Querstand in German or mi contra fa and relatio non armonica in Latin, often cover a slightly wider range of phenomena. Let's see, for example, how Zarlino, one of the most influential theorists of the late Renaissance, describes non-harmonic relations. Such relations take place when the interval between the first note of one voice and the second note of another is a diminished or augmented perfect interval, that is, augmented or diminished fourth, fifth, or octave, or unison, of course. From this, for example, you see that parallel major thirds are problematic, as they include a non-harmonic relation, mi contra fa. And this includes also the particular case we defined earlier and are focusing on this episode, a contradiction between a note and its chromatically altered version. Zarlino suggests that in compositions for only two voices, such progressions should be avoided, as they are very annoying to sensitive ears. Notice, however, that Zarlino describes only non-simultaneous false relations. Simultaneous false relations seem to have been so out of the question that he does not even bother to mention them. In early 16th century Italian music, we see a soft variant of our false relation. It is softened by having an intermediate buffer step between the notes that do not agree with each other. Here it is in a madrigal by Philippe Verdelot, who is considered one of the earliest madrigal composers of the 16th century. One can hear the false relation, but thanks to the buffer chord, it is not so strong. Now, let's examine an example with no buffer chords. In this beautiful and short theme from an anonymous variation piece from the Fitzwilliam Virginal book, there are no less than 3 cases of false relation. The first one is after the first cadence. The F sharp of the D major harmony is followed by a natural F. The second one is after the second musical phrase. The C sharp of the A major harmony is contradicted by the following C major harmony. This one is rather harsh, as the contradicting note is not just the third of the harmony, but its fundamental. The last one is within a phrase, and with a short buffer. The B of the G major harmony is contradicted by the bass, which plays a B flat. Let's now listen to the whole theme and enjoy the short awkward moments brought by the false relations. As we heard, even the non-simultaneous false relations are rather crunchy and harsh, and therefore not something that you'd find too often in the pieces of Orlando Di Lasso or Giovanni Palestrina, for example. But there is also the simultaneous false relation, which is extremely harsh. In theoretical writings from the time, it is either ignored or condemned. Let's see. So, if before the contradicting notes came one after the other, there are cases where the notes sound simultaneously, creating very harsh dissonances. The rightfully famous and beautiful motet Ave Verum Corpus by William Byrd has a non-simultaneous false relation right at the beginning. I'll sing the bass and play the other voices. But this is just a tease compared with the simultaneous false relations that are used later at Miserere mei, have mercy upon me. While the tenor is on F sharp, the bass comes from below and hits an F natural. Let's listen to the tenor alone. Now to the bass alone. Very often, the false relation is a consequence of smooth and well-written individual lines that only contradict each other on the vertical level. Let's listen now to the two voices together. In this case, it seems that Byrd used the false relation in order to amplify the expressive moment in the text. Do check the rest of this really great piece if you don't know it yet. The moments where simultaneous false relations really shine are in cadences. Let's have a look at this final cadence from Thalys' motet O Nata Lux. If we ignore for a moment the fourth voice from the top, we have a perfectly normal authentic cadence in four voices, in order of importance: tenorizans, cantizans, bassizans, and if you want, altizans. Adding a fifth voice, quinto part in Italian, would consist of simply doubling one of the consonances that are already there, probably excluding the notes taken by the cantizans, and this is for two reasons. One, when a voice is making a dissonance, both the dissonance and its resolution should generally be avoided by other voices in order to prevent horrible dissonances. And two, when a voice touches the so-called leading tone, as in the cantizans in this case, it must then go up, and if two voices are on that note, this will lead to forbidden parallel motion. Knowing all this, let's see what Thalys did with his fifth voice. From all the possible notes, he chose the natural F, that although it is a consonance, a third from the bass, contradicts the cantizans' dissonance, the fourth. In addition, the F is natural, without the sharp ficta of the cantizans. So, a conflict that starts with the ninth between the conflicting voices turns into an augmented octave, our beloved false relation. Let's listen. I'll play the voices and sing along with the fifth voice, so you could hear the false relation clearly. Don't get the impression that this is an extreme special case. In the music of Thalys, such cadences and other cases of false relation are very common. However, in the eyes of Zarlino, or any Italian or German composers from that period for that matter, such cadences are simply unimaginable. Let's see then what Thomas Morley, an English composer and a Zarlino follower, has to say about it. In his treatise, A Plain and Easy Introduction to Practical Music from 1597, he gives this example. I'll play its ending. There are two harsh elements here. First, the false relation between the bass that plays a cantizans with F sharp and the upper part that contradicts it with F natural. And second, the major 6 in the last bar. Referring to his example, Morley wrote that such endings were unpleasant and harsh, and that although they pleased some musicians from earlier times, and even some contemporary ones, they were always condemned by the most skillful in England. In another place, he wrote that such cadences are written in an old and stale manner. It's hard to say to whom Morley refers to exactly when speaking of the most skillful musicians in England. In modern perspective, the most skillful English composers of that period are Tallis and Bird, and they obviously did not condemn the use of false relations, they used them with pleasure. In fact, it is probably thanks to them that in modern times such cadences with false relations were named English cadences. This is, however, a plain misconception. Such cadences are found very often in the earlier Franco-Flemish repertoire, with composers from Josquin de Prez to Nicolas Gombert. Most often it is found in pieces for 5 voices and more. And this is confirmed by Morley, who writes that in such cadences, the voice that contradicts the cantizans with its unaltered note is often the 5th voice, added in addition to the standard cadential components. The reason that the phenomenon became connected specifically with the English repertoire might be due to the fact that in the later period, the ficta signs, sharps and flats, were written explicitly and consistently, while in the earlier repertoires this is not the case. Musicologists to this day debate which fictas should be used in that repertoire. Anyhow, no Englishman invented the English cadence, and thus perhaps its name should be changed to something like the cadence that is used by the English, although it fell out of fashion long ago. Interestingly, the use of false relations stayed in fashion in England long after Morley described it as old and stale. Even Henry Purcell at the end of the 17th century uses them with pleasure. So, the edgy false relations of the English music came from the Franco-Flemish repertoire but stayed for longer. But what about the edgy Italian music of the beginning of the 17th century? Did it not use false relations as well? Of course it did, but not in the same way. Let's see some quick examples from the music of Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi is known for being the bad boy composer who broke many conventions of counterpoint. Indeed, in his music, and as opposed to Zarlino's approach, he is not afraid to annoy the sensitive ears of the listeners. When needed, or more correctly, when the text calls for it, he would do everything in his power to make the listener feel uncomfortable. In his piece Lamento d'Ariana, for example, there are many harsh musical moments of varying degrees of severity. At the extreme end of Monteverdi's scale of harshness, however, stands the false relation, saved truly for the most horrific musical moments. For example, here is how Monteverdi composed the moment where Ariana cries out that she will be devoured by cruel and pitiless beasts, C sharp in the bass against a C natural in the upper part. An often overlooked and extreme false relation by Monteverdi is found in his Orfeo, at the very moment that Orfeo learns that his beloved Euridice is dead. It is overlooked because it is not explicitly written. It is based on the interpretation and realization of the basso continuo. As you perhaps know, the English term for basso continuo is figured bass. But this doesn't change the fact that most of the basso continuo lines in Italian music, and this includes Monteverdi's Orfeo, are not figured at all. The player should simply know and understand the music in order to correctly realize it. Looking at the exact moment that Orfeo hears that Euridice è morta, is dead, we see an interval of a minor sixth. Its effect is not durum or hard as one would expect. It is almost neutral after the harsh music that came before from the agitated character of the Messaggera. However, we haven't realized the bass yet. When a bass line descends a whole tone, it is very common to add a sharp sixth, G sharp in this case, thereby creating a small tenor cadence. This is also supported by the previous note of the bass. Now, however, the singing voice, in what Morley called the fifth voice, contradicts the cantizans, G natural versus G sharp in the realization. Now, the "she is dead" moment is appropriately horrible according to Monteverdi's standards. Let's listen. Needless to say, this is a classroom demonstration sung an octave lower than it should be. In the modern performance tradition of that piece, whether historically informed or not, this is not the interpretation, and a natural sixth is played above the bass. Such a realization yields an unusual progression that in Renaissance expression terms is neither harsh nor soft, it's just neutral. This does not take away from the convincing manner in which talented performers of our time have performed it. But if I should have to state what I believe was Monteverdi's intention in this case, it is the version with the false relation. The harshest contrapuntal means Monteverdi had, kept for the harshest moment of all. This was our show about false relations, a most horrible dissonance that we love listening to. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy Early Music Sources, consider supporting it on Patreon. Comment, share, and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.